the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse. Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we're coming to you rain or shine, at home, on the road. We got a couple of road warriors for you today, and we're going to be diving into a awesome discussion. We're going to be talking about building bridges for better ethical culture. So the challenge many of us have is that, we have to build, we have to influence behavior throughout the organization. And so today we're going to talk about how we can lay the groundwork for early interventions that actually work in practice. What kind of conversations do you have? Who should you be calling first? How do you create the right enthusiasm for the conduct that we're trying to influence before anybody needs it or before it's time for everyone to care about it? So we're going to talk about how to leverage the fact that most people do want to be ethical and helpful in compliance, and what happens when the default disposition gets tested. We're going to be honest about bridge building frameworks that work, why they fail, and so forth. And so this is really about making compliance real and important before it's urgent. So as I dive in here, let's get some more emojis going. We're already at 667. You guys are excited for this topic as much as I am, it sounds like. So you got to keep feeding your brain. You got to keep getting those CEUs. So we're giving out CEUs for SHRM, HRCI, and CCV if it's your first time here. Make sure you subscribe to the Ethicsverse, and then you will get those sent to you immediately for free because we love you. And we're also going to be giving away 5 copies of the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. This book is flying off the shelves. It's a bestseller, and it's because it's written really well. It's easy to digest, and I think the framework is the best that I've seen for proper dynamic AI governance. So if you missed the session that we had read on a couple of weeks ago, you should definitely go back to our YouTube channel and check that out, and stay active in the chat because this is a topic that I think everybody here is going to have some great things to say. And stay active and win yourself one of these books. It's phenomenal. As I'm running through these announcements, drop into the chat where you're coming from, and at least connect with everybody on LinkedIn, okay? We have to expand our network. Like I say every week, our network is our net worth. We had a great session about mentorship, and really the most underutilized asset that any of us have in compliance is this opportunity for the peer-to-peer mentorship. There are people on this call today that have figured out the challenges that you might be facing. And if you're not taking advantage of this collegial industry that we're all a part of, then you're leaving ultimately a lot of impact on the table, and you're putting a lot of undue pressure on yourself. So you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. Our jobs are hard enough as they are, but you got thousands of other people out here in this industry that are fighting the good fight in their corners of the world. And it's just on you to go ahead and reach out to them. Thank you for all of you who have signed up for the beta for our third-party risk platform. Appreciate the feedback that we've received. This platform is phenomenal. We're getting a lot of great feedback on it. It really helps you to leverage AI in a smart way, keep the expert in the loop. We're kind of moving away from human in the loop to expert in the loop. That's really the key. But you can build your workflow and let the AI do the work, and you or your team make the decisions on the risks that are most important. So if you are still interested in checking this out, please do click this QR code and someone will be in touch with you ASAP. We're still having conversations with folks about getting them on the platform during this beta phase that we're in. No pressure, of course. Also, no pressure on this. If you don't, maybe you like doing manual policies. Maybe you like having links all over the place and tracking people down through email. If that is a part of your job that you don't like, though, I would encourage you to check out Policy Plus. This is Ethico's brand new AI native policy management platform. There's a ton of phenomenal features in it, all coming from people that are in some of these legacy tools, wink, wink, and the pain points that they are experiencing. Policy is critical. Managing our policies is a arduous process, and this thing takes a lot of the guesswork out and really gives you the information that you need right at your fingertips. So I'm going to show you a quick video that you're absolutely going to love, and if you would like to learn some more,
creating one compliance policy takes over 40 hours. Manual research, manual drafting, and manual formatting for every single policy. What if AI could do it in minutes? Introducing Policy Plus from Ethico. Watch what happens when a compliance officer types a single prompt. Generate a HIPAA-compliant patient data privacy policy for a 500-bed hospital system. One click, and Policy Plus's AI goes to work. Section by section, the policy builds itself. HIPAA, high-tech, and state-specific requirements all mapped automatically. In under 60 seconds, a complete, structured, regulation-mapped policy is ready for review. Then, your compliance team refines it. Edit with AI suggestions, track every change with full attribution on every edit. With an 80% reduction in policy creation time, what used to take 40 hours now takes under 8. Regulation mapped from day one, this is what AI-native policy management looks like. See Policy Plus live. Book a demo at ethico.com/demo.
So again, this was built with all the guidance in mind, with all the feedback from people on the front lines who are struggling, feel like they're running through the mud with their policy management. So again, if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. And also, you better be subscribed to this. And if you're not, you need to leave the webinar immediately. You don't even care about compliance if you're not subscribed to Radical Compliance. So open up a new tab, go and sign up for Matt's newsletter. This should be a saved, this should be in your favorites. This website is constantly, he's constantly putting out phenomenal content. I was so honored to be invited to a dinner the other night where Matt was honored for an award for the best, long overdue award from my perspective, the best compliance journalist in the world. So he has stayed so independent. He's not a hack, which I love, and it's great content that he pushes out constantly. So I'm going to pass it over to the one and only Matt Kelly, recent award-winning Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance, to let us dive in here.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate that. And yes, to those who gave me that award, that was very unexpected and appreciated.
And well-deserved. You wouldn't say it. You would never say it, but well-deserved.
Okay. I mean, I don't have the award here in front of me now. It's a shame. Otherwise, I'd hold it up. It vaguely looks like a middle finger, which I won't give on the webinar Fitting. Here. But that is partly the spirit of frankness with which I try to use in my coverage. But we are here today to talk about how to build a strong ethics and compliance culture, and how to do that sort of at the front end rather than the back end after the bad thing has already happened and you're trying to clean up a dysfunctional culture. What's interesting is this idea came to me and to several of our speakers here separately at roughly the same time. I had thought of this originally back in January. Listeners might remember we had a webinar on retaliation against compliance officers. And after that, somebody wrote to me and said, we should talk about the idea of what they described as ethical leveraging and building up the natural goodwill towards ethics and good conduct that everybody has when there's no pressure to be ethical and do good conduct because everything's fine. And how can you build that culture then so that when the bad thing happens, people will be able to endure through some of these ordeals? That was the way that it had been presented to me. At the same time, lo and behold, Melanie Sponholz was talking about something very similar conceptually here, where Melanie was talking more about bridge building, but essentially, how do you reach out to the rest of the enterprise? So Melanie and I came together here to talk about this. Melanie is Deputy Compliance Officer at Bayada Healthcare in New Jersey. Melanie, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And then also, she enlisted another great compliance thinker on this, Lori Kelly, no relation to me, but Lori is Associate General Counsel at Torque Robotics. Lori, thank you for joining us. I have to admit, I don't know what kind of robots Torque builds. It sounds pretty cool, though, but we're glad to have you here, too.
I'm very happy to be here.
Wait, do you get a robot as part of the package when you sign up to work at your business?
No, unfortunately not. They're self-driving tractor trailers, so I'm not sure I would want one.
Fair enough. So now we have a lot that we want to discuss, but listeners, certainly if you have thoughts on this issue and how you're trying to do this at your own company or how you wish you would have done it earlier, if you've gone through an incident that really kind of crystallized the importance of compliance culture, feel free to chime in with questions anytime. The questions can go into the Q&A function. They'll get sent to me, or just put in your question or your comment in the attendee chat, which I see is already burning up, and we'll go from there. I guess my very first question was maybe, Melanie, I'll put it to you first, and then Lori, and then Nick. But tell us some more about, like, what are we really talking about here? What is the goal that compliance officers want to achieve with the bridge building? And what are the obstacles that confront you when you try to engage in this? Melanie, what would you say first? And then Lori, and then Nick.
Well, I think this is one of those classic simple but not easy answers, because I think what we're essentially trying to do is build trust and credibility. So simple, but also, a high bar to get over in a lot of ways. And I think the barrier, and it's interesting because we were all sharing notes about this topic in a shared document, and the name Brene Brown kept popping up. I don't know how many people are familiar with her. She's a sociologist, researcher turned, TED speaker, author. But I think one of the biggest hurdles to building this trust and credibility ties in a lot to her work, because she talks a lot about the impact of shame and the fear of vulnerability that people have. And I call it compliance PTSD. But I think there are a lot of executives and board members out there who have had experiences with compliance in their career that triggered this shame reaction where, instead of seeing a compliance issue as, an organizational challenge to overcome, they take it as a personal failure or a reflection on them. And it triggers that, this is my fault. This is a reflection on me. And that really channels energy down a bad path where it's like, let's minimize this. Let's not escalate this. Let's deflect or blame. Lots of words come up that are none of which are great for compliance, right? Whereas, if we can instead build these relationships ahead of time so that there can be vulnerability, then you can get a lot more constructive approach when a compliance issue comes up, because you can lead with transparency, and instead of trying to minimize, you can help your leadership team look at it as this is mine to fix instead of this is my fault. But that really requires psychological safety, which requires genuine relationships that have to be built long before this issue came up.
Lori, how would you describe this and what we're trying to crystallize here?
I think Mel summed it up really well, and we can all go home now.
Yeah, short Ethicsverse today.
So I think we all know that accurate risk assessment drives what we do, how we use our precious few resources. The key is accuracy. We need to make sure that the inputs to our risk assessment are right on, and we cannot see across everything, and we cannot see down deep into everything. And so we need, it's an overused cliche, but compliance is a team sport. And we have to enlist people from across the company to make sure that we're getting the right intel for that. And same words Mel used, we need credibility. We have to build trust. We need the seat at the table. And we are culture influencers, and we're not going to influence anything in a positive way if people don't trust us. I think that one of the major obstacles for us is that people still don't know what compliance is, and but they think they do. And so, for example, my team went to our internal marketing team a couple of years ago to ask them to help us create a logo for compliance. And the first thing they came back with was the clipboard with the checklist on it.
Fun.
And so we laughed and then maybe even shed a tear, because that's the antithesis of our approach.
Totally.
And so I love that this has been coined building bridges, because I think that's absolutely a key part of solving that problem.
And Nick, give me your thoughts here too, but I especially like how Lori sort of tied it to some practical points here that yes, we have to build bridges, but the default image is that this is one of these, for lack of a better word, the touchy-feely interpersonal part. But then Lori, you were saying, and that gives you the frank information and Melanie's point about vulnerability, and you can take that and dump it into your risk assessment because that's the job. And now suddenly we're getting back to how a program actually works. And that is how this ties together. So I suddenly am really liking this idea. But Nick, what are your thoughts?
So I think, love's the answer, what's the question, and life is relationships kind of first off. And so I know that this is the touchy-feely stuff, but I think the job at the end of the day is not a bunch of, dead documents that are on a shelf or living on a shared drive somewhere. It's really about behavioral influence at the moment a decision is being made. So we want to be in the minds or in the room when an executive or just a stakeholder up and down, the pyramid that is our company is weighing out, this trade-off between speed and integrity. I think at the end of the day, everything else is just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of theater, we need to, all the things that we're doing are meant to kind of, influence that behavior, though, when behavior is just sort of a clustering of decisions, we're trying to influence those decisions at the point of risk, right? I think the biggest obstacle is something that's structural, and it might also be influenced by like personality types that tend to self-select into compliance. So, I think compliance is like the only department in a company where, a win looks like nothing happens, right? So compliance is sort of the absence of disaster. When compliance works, it's sort of, reducing the volatility in the operations of the organization. Volatility is equivalent to risk. As the risk goes down, then there's, there's myriad sort of impacts and evidences of those things throughout, but they're hard to kind of, pull these little tiles together into a cohesive, mosaic. And, I think human beings are, it's hard for us to, synthesize all these disparate, data points. And that leads to what Lori was talking about, where people think compliance is one thing when we're actually, meant to be this other thing, this sort of connective tissue throughout the organization. So I think at the end of the day, like, it's on us to frame, and again, this is the touchy-feely stuff, but this is where I think the rubber meets the road. If the risk assessment leads to us saying, hey, we need to kind of make this kind of a change, we can put a great plan together. But at the end of the day, for that plan to actually come to fruition, people need to do things differently. Like, they need to behave in different ways. So when we're talking about like the brand of compliance and this sort of structural, impediment, I think it's on us to like do that reframe and overcome the, latent, compliance PTSD that, Mel talked about. I didn't talk about the kind of personality type thing, but I don't want to ramble for 5 minutes here. So I think it's kind of those two biggest pieces.
Is one goal of the bridge building that you want to get the other people to commit to something? And I don't know if that's right or wrong, because on one hand, people are generally, when everything's fine, they say, yeah, sure, I'm happy to help you out with ethics. I don't know if commit means you have to ask them to pledge their sacred honor and they sign in blood or something, but more like, we talked about this when it was easy and you said you'd help and you said you like ethics. Well, now we have an incident and this is going to get tough, but we held hands before. So now is that the right way to think about it? Or are there traps if we start thinking I'm going to try and get them to commit to good conduct or whatnot? Melanie, how could this go wrong, or how could we misperceive what we're talking about?
The way I view it, there will be a time when the rubber meets the road, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that in my mind, it's building relationships that are every day so that when that day arrives, you're in it together already because you're doing non-emergent things together. So I think for me, I started in healthcare as a physical therapist. So I was the provider, and then I moved into operations, and I was an operational director for a while. And then I, was asked to step into a QA role and eventually voluntold into compliance. And I think maybe that progression has helped me because I've always understood the value of making sure that the stakeholders know that I have empathy for them and that I am appreciating their role in the organization and the pressures that are under them or on them, so that so that it's authentic, right? So, I mean, I was talking about this at HGCA last week. I presented on, how do you talk to different stakeholders, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about today too, but can you, and this is where the credibility comes in that I mentioned earlier, can you make someone believe that you are seeing this from their vantage point as well as your own? So, we were talking about some of the, tricky stakeholders. It could be, like pick ops, maybe you have something, you have an ask that you need from a compliance standpoint that's going to require a workflow change in operations, which is going to be inconvenient from some respect. So even just being able to say that up front, say, hey, you know what? I realize that for these reasons, this may be difficult for your team, but here's the trouble for your team that I'm trying to avoid with this. And I'd really love to hear from you if there's a better, more elegant solution to this. Let's work on it together. It's having those kinds of conversations where you're really listening well, not just talking, and you're making an effort. Like for me, it was kind of easy having sat in some of those chairs to have that perspective. But if you haven't, that doesn't stop you from doing it now. Like go out, do a ride along, spend a day, with different folks doing different things before it's an audit or an investigation, so that you can take that approach, I think.
Lori, give me your thoughts, and in particular, pull on something that Melanie had just said about trying to not really pledge everybody's commitment, but more build a sense of we're all in this together already. And I think already is a key point there, that like there's always bad stuff. There's all, the bad things dial up or dial down, but we've been in this boat all along. So now that the seas are much more choppy, we're still in this together, and we have empathy and we have trust. Like I see where Melanie is going with that, but give me some of your thoughts about how we can try to do that.
Yeah, which, by the way, I think is a much more effective way of accomplishing this than asking someone to commit to something that they may not be sure what they're committing to. Mm-hmm. I actually have an example of this.
Sure.
Several years ago, we and this came out of our compliance risk assessment. We ended up hiring a very high-powered, very competent CISO. And I knew that was going to be a key relationship for me. So I immediately connected with her and worked very hard to understand who she was, what she cared about, what her style was. As an aside, I read recently that listening is not a courtesy, it's a leadership skill. And I think that's, I just messed it up, but I'm never going to forget it. I think it's really important. So this woman and I are very different personalities, different work styles, care about different things. But we talked about our families. She talked about her daughter going to prom and the shoes. And I honestly don't care too much about shoes, but I knew it was important to her. So I gave her that time. I was not inauthentic. But the other thing I did was I showed up to every one of her leadership team meetings. I was engaged. I was reliable. I had answers. I asked the right questions. So fast forward, we have a cyber event. Mm-hmm. She and I both have to work different parts of this, but we have to work hand in hand. Our work has to happen seamlessly. If we had not built the personal relationship, and if I had not shown up and demonstrated to her in the smaller things that I'm competent, I may not have all the answers, but I know what to do to get them, and I'm going to be there for her, I am reliable, that would have been a very different incident for us to work through. It would have taken longer. It may not have turned out the way it did. So the investment in the relationship, coupled with showing up and being a reliable partner, gave her the confidence that when she needed me, I was going to be there. And I had the same confidence that when I needed her, she was going to be there.
So, Nick, I'm going to ask a similar question of you now to pull on a thread that Lori had just mentioned about when you might have a crisis. You can just say, I don't know what the answer is, but we know how to work together to find this. And it seems like that is the ideal state that we want to have before the bad thing happens. And how can we build, like, that's what we're trying to get at as we talk about building bridges or leveraging whatever, whatnot. But what's your take on how we can try and do this, or how urgent it is?
I think it's extremely urgent. And I think, getting back to what I was saying before, our job is, not to make people like compliance, but I think it's rather to let them see that we can be a force multiplier to get them the outcomes that they already want. And so, as Lori talked about, and as Mel talked about, that takes a little bit of investment. That listening skill is a real skill. I mean, so much of our job is framing. I need to frame a new policy one way to the sales department and a different way to the ops department. The sales department is perhaps they care about closing deals. The ops department really, while they might not be good with change because they want to keep the trains running on time, they really care about process adherence, and they really care about quality, and they really care about like minimizing surprises. So we need to be able to have the sort of dexterity or the flexibility or the fluency, let's say, to frame a particular initiative that's a compliance-based initiative in different ways so that people can start to see how what we're requesting kind of can, layer into what they're already doing and help them achieve their end. So that's one. And, if you think about what, Lori's story there, I think it's a great example. She doesn't care about shoes, which, why? Just kidding. But like, she doesn't care about the shoes, but this person did care about the shoes, and being able to show up and have a conversation and really try to get to know somebody, not for, the niceties of it, but I mean, if you want to get kind of tactical and Machiavellian about it, to get some more data about what this person cares about. Like you said, that she cares about different things than you. She has a different work style than you. Well, that's all data that you should be able to like incorporate in your messaging down the road or when there's a crisis. And I think, I have that famous saying, don't ever tell me what to do, but like if I feel like somebody gets me and understands me, I'm always just going to be more open to whatever the request is. And I think in order to get that openness from your adversary, this person that you're trying to influence, it takes spending some time with them where they can feel heard and they can feel known. Like if you didn't take that time, if you just got right down to business because perhaps that was your kind of style, well, then she would have felt closed off. She wouldn't have felt, that connection point. And in that's a two-way thing. That relationship building is a respiration. There's a back and forth. There's a feedback loop. And like, I just see so many compliance people spend too little time on these things. And like, yet again, 2 conferences in the last 2 weeks, this is coming up over and over again. The chat is blowing up. We have to build these relationships. And I just don't think that the time that is spent on those things, building relationships with these counterparts, ever sort of comes back void. But it takes some intentionality, and it takes some, openness and some sort of like investigative, posture in order to like understand how this person is wired and what they care most about, because that's going to let you, frame it in the right way down the road.
Okay, so audience participation question here also for all of the listeners, but I would like to maybe talk about some of what are the actual things, specific things that compliance officers can do. We've all heard about, go have a cup of coffee with the business leaders, which is great, but, you can only have so many cups of coffee before you can't sleep at night. Melanie, you had mentioned doing ride-alongs. Lori, if you get to ride the autonomous trucks with the engineers, I am so envious. But what are some of the things that people could do, coffee or otherwise, that might help to build some of the trust? Melanie, what are your ideas and suggestions? Audience, what are yours? Pop them in the chat. What do you say?
Well, one of the things I found to be really effective is just treating your fellow leaders as intelligent humans. So, sometimes we'll have, like, there was an OIG advisory opinion that came up in the home health space in January. There's a lot of attention with the current political administration on personal care and Medicaid fraud. And there was an OIG advisory opinion about not paying sign-on bonuses for family caregivers. So there's Medicaid programs where you can pay a family member to provide the home health aid services. So we're a big organization. I mean, it's 40,000 people is a big cruise ship to turn, right? So instead of trying to meet with legal and cook up some, policy immediately regarding this, I was like, let's just get the information out as quickly as possible and, trust that we're going to get some feedback and some support from our teams to make sure that we're not doing the exact scenario that was pointed out in that was given to the OIG to evaluate. So, I hopped on team meetings. We have 7 different practices because we have home health, we have assistive care state programs, assistive care, we have skilled nursing, we have all these different practices within our organization. And I reached out to our practice presidents and said, hey, there's this advisory opinion that really could be meaningful to your practice. Can I hop on your leadership meeting for, 10 minutes and just tell people about it so that they can make better decisions? Because that's faster than me trying to come up with some way of enforcing this. Mm-hmm. And people really are receptive to that. So
100%.
Instead of coming on and saying, hey, new policy, you can't do X, Y, and Z, it's coming on and saying, hey, this is the risk landscape. We've got RFK talking about this. We've got Dr. Oz talking about that. We've got all the states on notice that they're supposed to be providing plans for how they're policing Medicaid. And now there's this OIG advisory opinion. Is this something that could be going on in our offices in the states that we're in? And if so, what's the most effective way to make sure we don't get on the wrong side of this? Instead of coming at them and telling them what to do, coming at them and saying, you're intelligent, this is what's going on in the risk landscape. How can we work together to still do good business and be competitive, but avoid this thing? And, people are really receptive to just being treated as an intelligent partner instead of, a more pedantic kind of policing approach. I think that's a great way to build the relationships that goes way beyond coffee.
There's a really famous article that I've probably talked about 100 times. And if you guys have not read it, you should at least drop it into AI and get the summary. But it's called Fair Process. It was written on Harvard Business Review many years ago. And it's exactly what Mel is talking about. It's so much easier to get that feedback and ask that either that how or that what question that makes my problem our problem, and brainstorm a little bit about what the most efficient path forward is. Just like leadership many times lacks the they don't know the context and the nuance of our job. There's 100 jobs in your organization that you lack that same context, and you don't understand that nuance just because you haven't been exposed to it. Bringing those people into the conversation is going to get you, again, better data on the front end, and it's going to allow for whatever you end up sort of launching, whatever policy, to be a little bit more well baked and reduce the risk that you're going to have to open that thing up because of some unforeseen circumstance that it ends up creating. So that Fair Process article. Oh, thank you, Joe. Round of applause for Joa. Johnny on the spot here. Joa on the spot. It's a great article, and it's exactly what you're talking about, because you have to have the reasonableness assumption. Everyone's reasonable. Everyone is relatively intelligent. Okay, wink, wink. But getting some of that input really ends up clearing out a lot of the impediments along the way.
I think one thing we sometimes forget is that everybody in your company wants your company to be successful.
Exactly.
And if that's not the case, then you have another problem. But aren't we all working toward the same thing? Mm-hmm. We all have different roles. They're all important. We all have a different function to do. But if we take a step back and remember that we're all working toward the same thing, I think that goes a really long way.
And I think that should be a recurring thing that we're saying all the time. When you're meeting with other people, you don't know what kind of compliance PTSD that they have. Talk about the elephant in the room, or at least feel around the room to see if there is an elephant. Somebody in the chat said, what if the other person doesn't want to build the relationship? And I don't know. I mean, everybody has an ego, everybody has opinions, and every human being, the best relationships can be built from like a mutual hatred of something. So find something that they hate, find something that they hate about a compliance team that you had in the past. Those are probably, characteristics that are not present in your vision for your program. There's always a way to pick the lock, I think. So, yeah, I don't know.
I was about to say that, ask them or think about, why do they not want to engage? Why don't they? They probably had a bad relationship with the CCO. Find out about that. Melanie, I think it was you. I might have cut you off. I'm sorry about that. What were you going to say?
No, I think it was Lori.
Lori,
Yeah.
what were you going to say then?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think building relationships is not just about having the conversation and listening to someone talk about their family. I think it's also in how we work together. So Melanie's example was a really good one about getting the information out there, taking action to share information, and I think Nick was talking about the workflow and learning about, here's something I want to do. How is this going to impact you? It doesn't mean we don't need a policy that covers this topic, but let's learn about the downstream impacts before we just go ahead and enact something. And training is another example. I have used this where there's a topic we have to train on. That's not negotiable. We don't have to take 30 minutes or 60 minutes of everyone's time. We can tailor that training for exactly what people need to know, and we can target it only to the people who need to know it. So we create a high quality training, so we're not boring people and giving them irrelevant information. And then I've gone to a leader and said, I know not everybody in your org needs to have this information. Help me figure out who really needs it. That goes toward building a relationship. They may not want a relationship with you, but you are showing up to say, I know what you do matters. I know that the time of your teams is important. I've got to take some of it, but help me figure out the right way to do it. That is relationship building.
Yeah, it's considerate, it's an understanding, it's an empathy, it's an authenticity,
Here's another question I had wanted to ask, and I'll put this out to the listeners as well. So I guess maybe a poll to listeners first, just yes or no. Would it be worthwhile or useful to have almost like tabletop exercises of ethical crises? And I want to draw a distinction between like a cyber attack, where people do tabletops all the time, or even, for better or worse, we might as well say like a workplace violence attack. How would you handle that? You can do kind of a walkthrough exercise, but like an ethical crisis around, I don't know, workplace misconduct or something to that effect, but something to help the leaders understand what it would really be like to try and go through an ethical crisis where we already said we were all in this. Now we actually have to do it. Melanie, is that like the right way to do it? Do you think that's a useful thing, or how could it be useful? How could it be a waste of time or misapplied? What do you think?
I mean, I think I think there's ways to go about it that can be useful. For instance, in the past, not in this role, but when I was working with some physician practices, I thought it was interesting. I found this great article about they took a bunch of corporate integrity agreements that had to do with focus arrangements with physicians. And they said, let's like rip something from the headlines, right? And someone who ended up with a CIA. And let's do two things. First of all, let's think about, do we have any vulnerabilities that could make us vulnerable to this similar thing happening to us? And to, put that lens, which all of a sudden makes the risk assessment feel more real and personal. And people start searching through their operational inventories to think, are we doing any of the things that ended up that, caused this issue? And then also you can also take it from the, pick an area of, an industry, or in our case, pick an area like focus arrangements, and look at all the CIAs. And now you can have AI do it. You can say, take all the publicly available CIAs and tell me what are the common elements that the government asked them to monitor for 5 years, and say, how many of these things could we say that we are doing already or monitoring already, so that, God forbid we get to that tabletop exercise, would we be able to come forward and say, hey, like, we don't need a CIA because we're already doing all of these things with our compliance program. So I think, taking some really practical examples like that and using them as, a framework for, let's hold our own program and our own operations up against what we would be judged against, should the rubber meet the road. That's not, that wasn't my first way of thinking about saying that, but, like, would we hold up? Like, would we hold up? Yeah. Are we ready? And is there some low hanging fruit? I'm not saying let's like redirect all our resources to making sure that we're doing everything that we would have to do in this scenario, but would we be reasonably ready for this? And where aren't we? And who wasn't even aware that this is something we should be doing? I think that it's a really good way of engaging your team and making it real to them, and also evaluating, whether you're meeting the table stakes that you need to have to address a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, all that is doing is it's stacking the deck in your favor some more. It's increasing exponentially the like intersection or interaction vectors with, stakeholders who you're trying to influence. It gives you a lot of data, to your point, on like, are the efforts that we've been putting forth actually creating the pattern recognition, right? Like, ideally we can wave a magic wand and everybody has the compliance pattern recognition throughout the organization. So that at those points of decision, at those points of risk, the right decision is made. Though these kinds of exercises really help them to start to develop that pattern recognition, because, again, we all got to do the annual training, but like, we're all the human beings that are taking that annual training face that same ebbing curve of the 90%, sort of like drifting out of their brain within 30 days or whatever the metric is. So things like this, they're fun, they're pattern interrupts in themselves, and they allow for more repetitions of sort of that transference of pattern recognition that we're really kind of going for.
Lori, any other thoughts, either not necessarily about tabletop exercises, but like the practice before the real, I don't know, the varsity game? That's not a good metaphor for what we're talking about. But, any other thoughts on how you can kind of get people acquainted with and in their comfort zone for this is how it's going to feel like when the thing happens?
Well, we do drills. We do them in the cyber arena. We do them we're driving these trucks. So we drill for on-road incidents. And there are plenty of opportunities in those drills to look for, are we doing the right thing? Are we reporting to the right people? Are we sharing information the right way? So drills are invaluable.
100%.
Another question I wanted to ask was more like, how does all of this unravel when the bad thing does happen? And we've been building these bridges and everything, and then suddenly there is an actual incident, and people aren't as committed to ethics or good conduct as they originally thought they might be, or they promised or whatnot. Like, how can this go wrong in the heat of the moment? What have you maybe seen that we should keep in mind? Or what else should we be especially attuned to? Melanie, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, any experience with it, but like, I'm always cynical that when the bad thing actually does happen, we will find out we are not as committed to it as we once thought that we were.
Yeah.
I have a couple thoughts that came to mind as you were framing up that question. One is, don't be a panicker as a compliance officer. Like, people need to feel confident. So, don't have your hair on fire when you have to, say, hey, this has happened. Present it as, we're all going to get through this together. Here are the facts. Let's talk about next steps. The time, like, you need to be what you would want if you were about to roll into surgery. You want that demeanor of the confident surgeon that's like, okay, bad things happen. They happen to all companies. It's our turn right now. And so, like, this matter of fact, let's just, move forward. And to go back to the Brene Brown thing, which is one of my favorites, we want to avoid the shame response, right? It's not a blame game time. We don't want to, this is not the time for whose fault. I mean, yeah, you're going to have to do a root cause analysis, but like, you want to deflect the shame response and get more into this is ours as a team to show up and show how well we can move through these choppy waters together, because we're a team, we're prepared, we're ready for this, and we're going to get through it. I always, I mean, it's cliched, but I always say my track record for getting through bad times is 100%. And so I like
still standing. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so we're going to get through this as a team. So like, how are we going to do this proactively? How are we going to make it ours to fix instead of ours as from a fault standpoint? And it may sound simplistic, but it's really in that emotional response and that ability to use those relationships you built to just say, all right, well, this sucks, but we're all going to get through this together, and let's figure out how we're going to do it.
Well, yeah, we can't catastrophize it, and nobody likes a panicky Pete. We have to be that sort of guide, that guardian, that sort of Sherpa through these things, because things are always going wrong. Things are never going according to plan, despite, and Matt, I said this on a call today with my team, like, I stole it from you. Okay. So every time I say it, I just I cite you. Okay. Sure. But our value is not in our plan. It's in our ability to plan. So yes, we of course need a plan. Those plans are never going to work out. Our value comes in our ability to take that context and take advantage of these relationships that we've built and guide our organization through whatever the, catastrophe du jour is.
So first, Nick, next time you say that, please feed it into ChatGPT so it will give credit every time.
We got to feed the brain. Yeah, I got you. All right.
I guess, Lori, one question I was originally going to put to you was, what drives management to suddenly override and panic about all of the stuff we said we were going to do, but now actually, no, we don't want to do it. We're going to sideline compliance. But Melanie had mentioned deflecting the sense of shame, or I would say deflecting the sense of fear, because that's the thing that makes them override. But give us some thoughts about where does this come from and how do you diffuse or deflect that before it blows up and suddenly we're panicking?
Yeah, well, I think I may have said this before, but I'll say it again. We're dealing with people, and crisis is not the norm. So how are people going to respond to crisis? They're going to be afraid. They're going to be fearful. And I think the first thing is it's good to acknowledge that, whether you use that word or not, maybe ask about it, pause, take a moment to check in with people. How are they doing? And that is not necessarily touchy-feely. That is information gathering, because you can start talking, you can start going down a path of here's what we're going to do, here are the actions we're going to take. But you may have some paralyzed people in the room who can't see clearly, who are going to be defensive, who have baggage that you're not aware of. And we don't need to get all the baggage out, but I do think that it's worth checking in with people. I also think this is where you get the return on how you've shown up before this day. If you've been reliable, you've led with calm in the small things, if you have treated the smaller things that have come before proportionately, so everything does not become an equal-sized crisis,
right? Then
you show that you know what's going on. If it's small, we treat it like it's small. That doesn't mean it's not serious, but we treat it like it's small. So when it's big, okay, now it's big. So our approach is going to be a little bit different. So I think those are two things: checking in with where people actually are, and also the way you lead through.
Here is a great question from an attendee. Do you think that all that we're talking about here are these different challenges when it is a large organization versus a small one? And how would you try and navigate each type of organization? They had mentioned large or small hospitals. So Melanie, I'll put it to you first in your healthcare, but this is true irrespective of the sector or industry. I would guess that trying to do all of what we're talking about at a company of 20,000 people is a lot harder than one of 200.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's that like turning the cruise ship example. Mm-hmm. It's a lot harder to turn a cruise ship than a 20-foot motorboat. So I think it is you have more relationship building to do in the larger organization ahead of time. And that's going down a few layers too, like really understanding how change gets effectuated in an organization so that when you need to do it quickly, that's not when you're trying to figure out the communication channels that you have available to you. You know, these are things you need to figure out in advance. And, you know, I think that's also where sometimes you need to not let perfect be the enemy of good enough. You know, like the example of getting the word out quickly, it's a lot harder to get a new policy in place in a national 50,000 employee organization with a bunch of sub entities than it is to get one out in a 500 person organization. So you don't want to get stuck in inertia because you can't get through the policy process fast enough. Get the word out right away. Get the wheels in motion from an action standpoint, and catch up with the bureaucracy as need be. But there's you have to understand how to get action going in your organization as quickly as possible to get remediation and relief and evidence that you were on it, and then know those communication channels and the right people to get through the layers of bureaucracy on the back end of that.
Mm-hmm. So, and if I can add on to that, I think it is obviously more challenging because it's more behaviors, it's more individuals that you need to ultimately influence at a larger organization, right? And that fair process article talks a lot about this sort of concept of how to kind of push change in a knowledge work environment, which is what we're kind of talking about here. I think, though, you can synthesize fair process at scale by, you're not going to talk to every frontline employee, but you should get some input from different levels within a particular business unit if a change is going to affect that business unit. And you're not going to be able to talk to 500 people in that business unit, but if you have a couple of people in the kind of different levels in the organization that you can kind of bring reference to sort of subsequent conversations, you can really start to synthesize. I mean, you're going to be able to get some of the information, right? But you'll be able to kind of synthesize this fair process where, well, yeah, I as a frontline employee didn't talk to Mel about this process change, but I know somebody at my level did. And I know that this was a lot more of a thoughtful kind of rollout than what I was used to in the past, where it was sort of this ivory tower compliance, edicts coming down from on high.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that a couple of people here are getting towards some of the subjects and tactics we've talked about many times. Like somebody said, find the thought leaders or the stakeholders, get buy-in from them. It kind of sort of gets to having a compliance ambassador program, which we've talked about multiple times here. But I liked the way that Melanie, you had phrased it. I think you said, how do we get to the point where things can happen, and how do we get to action? And that is different at a larger company where the action might be a policy versus a smaller company where it might be an actual decision that can be made maybe without a policy if you don't need one because you're too small. Lori, give me some of your thoughts here about how to, pull the levers of action and power, and how that differs from a larger one versus a smaller company. And, how does all of this function in those different types of organizations?
Yeah, I have experience in the smaller organizations, but we were in 3 different countries and multiple states, and I very much value building individual relationships. And I think not just with leaders, not just with peers, but also with the frontline workers. But I also recognize I can't meet everybody in our organization. They're not going to know me. So what do I do about that? Well, I have a team, so they're part of that as well. But I was thinking about this, and reputation is similar to culture in that culture is going to happen. So you want to influence it, right? Yep. And you're going to have a reputation as a compliance officer. You can influence what that reputation is.
Right.
You can influence whether you are trustworthy, whether you are reasonable, whether you are a dictator, whether you are the police. And I have seen it happen where I have relationships with some employees for whatever reason. Maybe I ran into them in the break room, or maybe I actually work with them, but people talk. And if you are building your reputation, then when somebody needs you or needs your input, they're more likely to come to you. You've made yourself more approachable, even if they've never met you.
You know, I have opinions in town, I have opinions of restaurants in my town that I haven't even gone to. Kind of to your point, somebody tells me, oh, that restaurant sucks. I pass that information along. Or I say, yeah, that's not, you know, I heard that that's a great restaurant. We have the power, to your exact point. Like, you're not going to get a reputation. You have a reputation. It might be one that is inherited. It might be one that's not fair, or it might be based on a stereotype or whatever. There's some thought of you in the organization. And to your point, if we're not taking an intentional step to try to craft that and make sure that the right frame is around our face, so to speak, then we're leaving a lot of influence on the table, and we're leaving, you know, we're kind of crossing our fingers ostensibly and, you know, kind of leaving it up to chance. You know what I mean?
So we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to squeak in one last question, maybe about 60 seconds each. I'll put it to Melanie first, and then Lori, and then Nick, you can wrap it up. But how much time are we supposed to donate or allocate to this bridge building? Because compliance officers do have a day job that's busy with a lot of other stuff. So there's a lot of things that you have to tackle. And where does this fit in the priority list? How much time should we devote to it? But Melanie, what would you say? And then Lori, and then Nick, I'll let you wrap things up for the day.
I mean, honestly, I think everything that we do is part of the bridge building. I mean, you can look at it as some of it is more intentional.
Exactly.
Like maybe you're going to go out of your way to organize time to talk to someone you haven't talked to before, or, you know, so that's important, and you got to put some time into that. But every meeting that I attend, am I paying attention? Is it obvious that I'm looking at my other screen? Am I listening well? Do I contribute? Like every interaction you have is bridge building and reputation. To your point about reputation, like everything that you do is building up to, you know, what you're going to get back when there's, you know, a crisis or a need. So I think you have to go into every day remembering that, you know, every interaction is a deposit in that bank, and not look at it as like a side gig, you know.
Lori, what would you say?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the example of developing the workflow and socializing a policy while it's being developed, the return on investment for those things is totally worth the time.
And then Nick, you can either answer that question or just give us your closing thoughts and your wrap up. But it's been a great talk.
Great talk as usual. Let's get a round of applause for these guys. Phenomenal discussion. You know, I really do love these sessions. To answer your question, I think it's ABC. Always be closing. You know, having that intentional time to, you know, maybe, you know, make sure that you're having those conversations and reaching out to other people and building those relationships. Like, you need to make time, you know, on your calendar for those important non-urgent tasks, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about putting, you know, deposits in the bank, so to speak, you know, before the crisis strikes. So you need some intentionality about that. But two, in your program and building that brand on every single one of those interactions that you have. And that might sound like, oh my gosh, that's one extra thing. It's not. It's just one thing. That's really what our whole job is. Our whole job is to influence the people around us up and down the stack, bring more people in the middle management level into our, you know, our risk management we're responsible for, more participation with folks. And there's myriad opportunities once you start opening your eye to drive that influence forward every single day. So thank you guys again. Let's get a massive emoji explosion. One more, because I just want to try to break a record here. Next Tuesday, we have an Ethico University. So we're going to be looking at Policy Plus. So if you have not filled out the demo, Policy Plus, ask some questions. We're going to be doing that. And then we have a whole slew of AI features rolling out across our case management platform. So we're going to show you some of those cool use cases and how you might be able to leverage AI in your day-to-day work so that you can spend less of your time pushing papers and more of your time making decisions. And then next Thursday, we are talking about proving that compliance pays, the ROI of doing the right thing.